Okay, I'm Rick Mason from Mid-Michigan CFUG, and we have a guest tonight, Guust. Is it Nieuwenhuis? Nieuwenhuis?
Yes,
Okay,
Nieuwenhuis in Dutch. Yes, correct.
thank you. Randy and I met him in Europe this year. For those who don't know, Mura was the most popular CMS, open source CMS in the cold fusion world. Then all of a sudden one day, they went closed source, and that's because the company had been sold. And Goose company in Europe did training and support and maybe more for Mura, and they were able to fork the last bit of the code that had been public open source, and they've been working on it for the past year. They hired a former Mura developer who's based in Europe, and I've been following this for a year. Very excited about what he's doing, and we've already moved our CMS for the CFUG and to MASA, and I think it's starting to happen on the Michigan State campus where they've been big supporters as well. So take it away, Guust.
Thank you. Yeah, indeed, we met in Munich earlier this year at CF Camp. There could be a very big chance that we met before. I've been to the US a few times to Cold Fusion and to Mura conference. So, yeah, back in June in sunny Munich in Germany. So yeah, an intro to MASA CMS. That's what I want to talk about today. Let me maybe present myself a little bit first. So my name is Guust Nieuwenhuis. I'm Dutch. That's why my name sounds so funny. I'm Dutch, but I'm living in Belgium for a while now. I think I was 3 years old when the whole family moved to Belgium. I'm working as a managing partner at We Are North. We're actually, while I'm in Belgium, We Are North is mainly based in the Netherlands. So I travel a lot between Belgium and the Netherlands. My day-to-day job, what I do is basically being a full stack web wizard, doing a lot of stuff, back end, front end, JavaScript, TypeScript, a lot of Cold Fusion, but a lot of DevOps as well, a bit of everything. And in my free time, I got involved in the local soccer club when my kids started playing soccer, and I became a soccer coach. I'm doing some sports myself, because you can't really say that coaching is doing sports. So I'm riding a lot. I'm riding my mountain bike a lot. So that's a little bit about myself. And let's dive into today's topic. So an introduction to MASA CMS. Rick already introduced it a little bit. But before I dive in a little deeper on the history of MASA CMS, maybe let's first repeat what is a CMS. CMS stands for Content Management System, and it basically allows you to create, manage, publish digital content. And you could do that for a variety of media, and which can be a website, which could be an intranet internal to your organization, but it could as well be a mobile application or some narrowcasting, for example. And to be able to do that, there are a few different types of CMSs, we could say nowadays. We see a big split and a big evolution in content management systems. And you have the traditional content management systems, or the traditional approaches in content management systems that are basically all about rendering your content on a screen, and to take care of rendering that content and to take care of everything to be able to publish that content. But nowadays we're talking a lot about headless CMSs as well, which they basically don't generate any front end anymore, but they offer a bunch of APIs. And those APIs basically allow you to implement the content and to pull it into your front end, for example. And we're talking a lot about decoupled CMSs as well nowadays, where the front end and the back end are completely separate from each other, where you're running, for example, with Next.js is a very cool framework to work with if you're doing that kind of setup, where you're basically, you have the CMS, the core of the CMS running somewhere, but it's very hidden, and any request coming in from a client, for example, doesn't even reach that. It's cached somewhere in a layer, static content, those kind of setups. That's what we mean with decoupled CMSs. So to continue a little bit upon what Rick mentioned earlier, once upon a time, I did some research preparing today's presentation, and I dove into, started using the Wayback Machine to look up and go back in time to be able to represent this timeline correctly with some specific dates even. MASA CMS has its origins in Mura and even Sava CMS. We're back in 2006 when a first version of Sava CMS at the time had been developed by Matt and Sean over at Blue River, and they started using that to serve their customers and to respond to their customers' needs to build websites. Back in 2006, it was an internal project. And it stayed like that up to the first half of 2008, when they decided to release Sava CMS as an open source project. So back in 2008, really quickly, it was a little less than a year later, they renamed it. They had a little bit of a conflict around the naming of Sava once they got public with that, and they rebranded it to Mura back in April 2009. And then jumping ahead like 11 years in the future, many versions, because what the version they came out with initially was a 5.0. But back in August 2020, they announced the latest version, Mura 10, but they also announced that they were going to keep that version closed source and no longer offer MASA as an open source solution. They announced that it would take a year, a little bit over a year, around a year before they would actually stop supporting it. So they kept supporting it for a year, which means that the latest open source software release of Mura was a 7.1 release back in August 2021. And a few days before that last release was out, made public, a few days before we came around, and with we, I mean We Are North. We were brewing on this thing for a little while already, but we had to do our due diligence and prepare everything. We had some marketing to do, some rebranding to do, and everything, and which meant that back in July 2021, sorry, we came forward and announced that we forked the latest open source version of Mura, and we rebranded it as MASA CMS. Back in July 2021, that was MASA CMS version 7.2. We basically continued the numbering the numbering from Mura, just to make that really clear, and I'll explain some more about the version numbering later on. So 7.2 in July 2021, around half a year later, we came out with 7.3, where we introduced a redesign for part of the admin interface. We introduced a new file browser, and we introduced the MASA scope, which is which is in future is going to start replacing what we know as the Mura code. So earlier this year in January, we came out with 7.4, which included a bunch of new modules as well as reviewed modules for the front-end editing, and I'll show a little bit more about that. And in between all those minor versions, we had an additional 6 security patches that we released to fix a few issues that we were informed about, things that we saw ourselves, to make sure that we keep the product stable and have it as secure as possible. Up until today, we're still releasing security patches for version 7.2, 7.3, and 7.4. That's the approach that we have right now. But we ask people to be as on the most recent version as possible of MASA, so that over time we could focus on let's say the latest and the previous version to get those patched when necessary. A fun fact when doing a bit of research, and I knew this already, but I saw it written down somewhere on a really old website. But the rebranding that Mura did back in 2009 from Sava to Mura had a few similarities with the rebranding that we did from Mura to MASA. Sava was a reference to a river. I don't know what river exactly. I need to look that up. But so when they changed it to Mura, they did it for 2 reasons. One being that Mura, as well as Sava, is a river. And the other reason is that the name Mura consists out of 4 characters, as does Sava, which means that that was easy to, for example, in the logo, replace that, but also on various other occasions. The fact that it's the same number of characters made that rebranding a little bit easier. And exactly the same logic we had back when we came up with the name MASA. MASA is a river as well. Well, actually, it's the old name of the river Maas in Rotterdam, where our North headquarters are located. One of the biggest rivers in Europe, the Maas. We used MASA, which is the old name for the river, just to make sure that we wouldn't get into some legal troubles with other products already called MAS. But it wasn't a coincidence that, again, it's a name with 4 characters. And it's not even a coincidence that it's also starting with an N, because it basically made a lot of the rebranding and the refactoring we did around the 7.2 release a lot easier. So yeah, that's a little side note, fun story. So what is MASA CMS then? Well, first of all, it's an enterprise content management system, and what we mean with enterprise is that it's not exclusive to enterprise, but it is enterprise, which means that it can handle the unique demands of large organizations, which includes stability, performance, security, customization, and a comprehensive support for content management and workflow needs. So it's content management, like I explained before. You can really manage your content and serve it in any way you need or you want to. A second important thing about it is that it's open source software. We continued the same licensing model that Mura already had with MASA, which basically means that it's open source. You can take it. There are a few exceptions in the license, but it should be pretty clear. And those exceptions are basically just so that you can put your custom code in there without the need to follow our licensing. But there's some exceptions for you to put your code and keep that code to yourself. We focus heavily on security and privacy first. That's a bit in our DNA. We are North, and we also want to emphasize that with MASA. That's one of the reasons why we've been putting so much effort in security with all the patches that we did, but we're also communicating very transparently about it. We're not fixing something secretly somewhere in a patch. No, we'll mention that it's a security patch. We'll ask for you to update and make sure that you're on the latest version, and privacy as well. That's an area where we want to invest a little bit more in, but we want to make sure that you could use MASA in a privacy-friendly environment, especially over here in Europe. With the privacy law that we have, there is a strong emphasis on that in general. So that's why we're very keen on being in line with that as well. We're committed to the community. We have a discussion board where issues are when issues are raised, we try to look into them and get them fixed as soon as we can, keeping in mind the availability that we have of our own resources, of course. And we're trying to share as much as we can with the community. Next to that, and I'll reference that a little bit more later, we have some enterprise support options that we offer to help out and to be available for anyone who needs that level of support. So we talked about Mura, about MASA, but how would you upgrade to MASA? Well, actually, and kudos to the people back in the days of Mura that implemented this. In the latest versions of Mura, there was already a really good built-in auto update functionality. And basically, if you want to upgrade from Mura, and I must say Mura 7.1 or later, if you want to upgrade from Mura 7.1 or later to MASA, you just need to look for the settings.ini.cfm file in your project and just change the value of the auto update URL setting. Once you've done that, log into the administrator, reload the application so it picks up the change in setting, and then execute an update of the core, and it will automatically no longer pull it from the latest version of Mura, but it will pull it from the latest version of MASA on GitHub and update your project. We've done migrations from older versions of Mura as well, Mura 6.0, 6.1, 6.2. Those versions, we've migrated them over to MASA as well. There's a little bit more work in that, but still, it's still very easy and pretty straightforward to get that solved. Talking about some of the features in MASA, because I didn't really ask before. I don't really have a good idea how familiar everybody in the call is with Mura and with MASA nowadays. So let me quickly give you an overview of some of the areas where MASA is strong and where MASA really shines and makes a difference compared to some of the other systems. So the first one I want to highlight is content management. Content management is the core of any CMS, of course, but especially for MASA, and there are a few different options that have been introduced over the last few years in Mura first, and that we've taken over with MASA that I definitely want to show you, and I can immediately I'll give a little demo on this so that I can immediately show you what we changed in MASA 7.3, for example, with the updates for the administrator. So let me quickly jump out of my presentation and go to a local instance that I have with MASA here. So this is the front end of the website. First of all, let's make sure that we log in so that we are authenticated. So it's a local environment, so I have admin, and of course I do get a warning about that. But going back to the front end of the site, now that I'm logged in, I see this navigation, this toolkit at the top of the window that I can hide, that I can show, which allows me to make some changes to the page. And this is also a first place where you could actually go in and make a change to the content and manage that content really. So we have a little pencil here, and if I go to the inline edit, I stay on the page, but suddenly I'm able to edit the content on this page. So we have the body here, and I could double click and go in there. I've got an editor, and I could easily say, okay, I want to add a little bit of content here. And potentially even look for a picture. I can browse the server. I can upload something from my local machine. Now that I think about it, I didn't really prepare something. But what do we got as a picture here? Yep, there we go. A little screenshot of something that I want to add to my page, just to make clear what I'm talking about in my content. I've selected it and I can add it, and it's automatically added to the page. So this way I can edit the content. There's much more you could do, of course. You could do stuff with styling. You can copy paste stuff over from your clipboard, from Word. You can all the basic and the styling we're familiar with, as well as the Mura tag, the MASA tag, which is still available as well to add some dynamic stuff to your page. And once I'm done, I can hit done editing here, and I can decide to save and do that as a draft, or immediately publish the page. So I can do that, publish, and that way I edited the body of the page. If I go back to inline edit, one of the other things I could do, I could put, for example, let's say, put a little bit of info to the left side, to the left column here, for example, and I could say that I want to display who the author is of this page, for example. There we go, and then publish again. And now you see that there is a little info box mentioning who the author of this page is. And that's one of those modules I talked about. I'll go a little bit deeper later on modules and what we can do with it. So that's the inline edit. The other option that we have, we could go directly to a full edit. And if we do that, we go into the administrator in the backend interface, let's say, the administrator, where we have the same body we can edit, a slightly different interface, but we also here have a lot of additional options that we can add to configure this page. What we see here is some of the new interface. This is some of the new interface that we introduced in 7.3, where we have a big area on the left where you could edit your content. And it's a bit with a big image that doesn't look great, but what I can easily do is say that we're gonna resize this image to a little bit smaller so that this looks a bit better. It's a bit clearer now. So we have this big body where we could add the content of the page. And the toolbar is back that we had before in the inline edit as well. But on the right side here, and I can make that a little bit bigger, we have a lot of options. And here we have all the information that was previously in MASA and in Mura on different tabs when you were editing content in the administrator. If you have the page type, the title, the navigation title, all of these. When we go to summary, we could put a summary in, we can give somebody credits. The credits to the page, we could add some SEO properties like the meta description here. some notes on the page, which is more for internal use. We can add an associated image. We could do some publishing options where we could, for example, say what the release date is, so that we put today in as a release date. We can exclude this from site search, for example. A lot of options here. Layout options to select the template we want to use, and a lot of options around that, tagging and related contents. One of the cool things here, because everything is a bit hidden below those boxes, but if I go to the search box here at the top and I type credits, it immediately opens the block of options for me where those credits are configured. So if I close it again, I go to release date, there we go, and it opens publishing because that's where we have the release date. So this makes it easy for you to, if you know, wait a second, so navigation title, where was that? Oh, I probably triggered it on navigation here. That's an interesting one we should look at. But title, there we go. It opens the basic settings. So this is where we can change a lot of stuff. We have some more options here than just editing the content on the front end. And down at the bottom, again, we have the option to save a draft, also to preview it. And if we hit preview, oh, okay, it got some pop-up blocking. So then we'll can we? Oh, there we go. We have a preview here. That's the way we could preview it. The page, and once we're done, we can save it to a change set, or we could immediately publish it and have it out there for the users. So this is a little bit of introduction on how some basic content editing in MASA. Going back to my slides. So content management, a next cool feature in MASA is what we call content modeling. You see that on the screenshot a little bit on the right. So basically, we have the notions of a page, a link, a folder, a calendar. Those content types are by default available in MASA. But you can create your own content types as well. You can create a content type for a person, for example, or for a product, where you configure additional properties that are specific to that content type. And we do that with class extensions of content types and so on. You can even, if you want to, change the default types that are available in MASA and change the page content type and extend that and model that to your own needs. Next to those class extensions that allow you to create those content types, we also introduced some custom objects that you can work with, and which really allow for you to create separate from the site tree to really create a definition of a model and start creating objects for that content node specific for that model. But that's a deep dive topic that I'll leave for now. A very strong feature in MASA is the whole functionality around workflows and change sets. MASA allows for you to make a bunch of changes and not publish them right away, but group them together in a change set. A change set that contains all the changes, for example, on your website for a new product launch that you're planning, for a sale coming up, or for a new academical year, so that you have all the time you need to start preparing that and make those changes without putting them live right away, or without the need to keeping track of all the draft pages that you have all spread out on the website that you need to manually put live on a certain date. Because once you bundle all those changes in a change set, the cool thing about it is you can really easily say, okay, and now I want to publish the whole change set. And then in an instance, all those changes you might have done on multiple pages, they go live all together. And before you do that, and before you put them live, you could preview that change set as well. You could easily browse the website as if you're browsing a version which is about to release in a week, for example. And that releasing you could do with a click of a button, but you can even schedule that. Here in Belgium, we have something, we have a sales is very regulated, which basically means that in Belgium, let's say around 15 days before sales are allowed, you're not allowed to do any sales. So you basically, all the sales you do with a store, for example, you want to prepare all of that, you make all those changes to the website, you save them to a change set, but then you want to put that live, and you want to do that 1 minute after midnight. Funny story is, one of the sales periods starts on the 1st of January. So good luck finding a colleague who's okay with putting making that change set go live 1 minute after midnight on New Year's Eve. Probably no one wants to do that. So you can really schedule that and automatically have the system publish a complete change set the moment that the timestamp you defined the data has arrived for your change set to go live. And one of the cool things is, even another cool thing is that you can put a change set live, but you can really easily roll back that change set as well. So if you're doing a temporary 2 weeks promotion, you can easily put it live, and after 2 weeks, just withdraw the whole change set and go back to the previous version of your website. That's change sets, but it's not only change sets when we're talking about workflows. We're also talking about approval chains. MASA has a strong engine built in for approval change, which allows you to configure a flow of approvals required within your organization. And you can have people being the people that have the rights to edit the content. But if you have legal, for example, or if you have marketing that needs to put a stamp of approval before it can actually go live, you can define that in an approval chain workflow, and then people get automatically notified when something is available for them to approve. And once they approve, it can go to the next stage, and those people get notified, and so on and so on and so on. Which is combined with those change sets, because you could do the approval change on top of the change sets. Then you get a really, really powerful engine with workflows and possibilities around that. It's extendable, and what I mean with that is that there are a bunch of different options for you to tailor MASA to the needs of your organization. And we're talking, of course, we're talking about theming, but we're also talking about plugins that allow you to really build like small applications within MASA, or modules which allow you to add additional front-end components or additional back-end processes to MASA. And let me show you one of those really quickly. So when we go back to this page here and we go back to inline edit, I created a little front-end module. We have a bunch of them here on the right side. We used the info one before, but we could use image to draw if we want to add an image somewhere to the page. Forms, gated assets, embed some code if we want to put some YouTube, embed a YouTube video. But YouTube videos you could also do through the media. Through media, for example, there is a bunch of options here, collections. And one of them is that I've got here is quote. And quote is not one which comes out of the box with MASA, but it's one that I added myself this afternoon. So if I drag that to the page, I can add this quote to the bottom in my display area. I can add it to the left side as well if I want. I can even put it in the middle of the content, for example, over here. It immediately renders the module, but right now I haven't put any information in, so it renders a blank space. But if I go to the code here, and if I then look for a quote, for example, what's one of my favorite quotes I've seen, or a bar, which is from Theodore Roosevelt. And what you see right away on the left side is that whenever I change something and I leave one of those input fields, it immediately updates the rendering of that module on the left side. So if I add a source, for example, and do like Roosevelt Memorial in Washington, and I leave the field, it immediately adds that to the rendering of that module. There is some additional styling you could do. You could add a label, for example, here. You could do some additional styling, or I can define, for example, that I want to add some padding or some margin. I want to decide what the width is. I could easily say, okay, I want this to be 1/2, so that it only takes half of the space here. A lot of options around theming as well. If you want to do color stuff, you can change backgrounds. You can even put background images in here, and some custom options if you want to add a custom CSS class, for example, or even some custom styling. A lot of options here to really tailor to your needs. I can close it. If I want to go back because I made a typo, for example, which could very well be, I click on that blue pencil, and it opens it for me again, so that I can easily change it, and I can publish it as well. Let's have a quick look. Okay, so how does that code look? Because I do want to show you some code today as well, of course. The code module here is defined in my modules folder in the root of MASA. This is not the only place you could put modules in. You can also include modules in your theme, so you can bundle them together with your theme. I put it in the global modules folder in the root of my project here now. And it starts first of all with an XML configuration file that we have here, where we define what the name is for this module, and also very important, because otherwise it doesn't show up, you need to specify on which content types you want this module to be available. And you could really easily here restrict and say page default, for example, and that way only when your content node is of type page default, only then it becomes available in that list. If you, for example, have a little cool module you want to use only for product pages, you could say page product if that's a custom type that you added, and it's only available on your product pages. So that's the first one. Then the second thing that we have is the configurator, which is a bit of Cold Fusion code here, where we define some parameters, and then have a few a text area where the quote can be put in, an input field for the author, and an input field for the source. There is some magic around here, but I would refer to the documentation on that to better understand what's going on here. But it's you have the ability to completely configure and do whatever you want in that right side area where the properties of your module are located. And then the last file we need, because for something as simple as this, we only have 3 files available, which is the bare minimum. And the last one we have is just a simple CFM template, where we basically have an output where we create a block quote, HTML block quote, and then put in the information that we collected in the configurator. We've got the code here, and in case there is an author or there is a source, then we also put a footer in where we put the author and if available, the source as well. So this is a bit of just a simple template that we have. I'll reference the documentations later on, but what I can tell you here is that I created this one in pure Cold Fusion. It's perfectly possible as well to create a module like this without a single line of Cold Fusion and purely in HTML. Purely in JavaScript. And for that, I reference to the documentation to find a few examples on that. So yeah, that's what a module looks like in MASA. So I talked about theming. Well, I mentioned theming. I mentioned plugins. We talked about modules, and of course, there are a bunch of APIs available that allow you to do a lot of front end stuff as well against all the information that we have in MASA, in the content management system. MASA supports deployment flexibility, and what we mean with that you can install MASA on premises as well as in the cloud. You can install it on a traditional server. You can do it in a complete containerized environment with Docker, for example. All those options are available. There are no limits there. Whatever you need, if you want to put it on shared hosting or on your VPN, on your own dedicated servers, on AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, everything is possible. There are no limitations there. And once you've got it running, you could use it as a traditional CMS, like I showed you earlier with the content editing inline on the front end, and really render the website as well for it to be visible. Or you could use MASA as a headless CMS, where you, for example, in a mobile app, you make API calls to MASA to collect and get the content that you eventually display yourself in a mobile app, for example. But that could very well be a JavaScript based website with React, with Angular, whatever you prefer, or any other type of system. As long as you need content, you could pull it out through the APIs that are available. So that's it. Deployment flexibility and traditional or headless approaches. Let me show you a few sites that have been built, so that these give you a bit of an idea of where you could take MASA and what you could do with it. I've got a first example that we have here is the Royal Air Force over in the UK. They're running their complete website on MASA, multiple websites actually, on MASA CMS. They migrated over from Mura to MASA as one of the first to do so, and they have a variety of websites to explain about the organization and what they do, as well as some really cool. And I didn't create a video, but this is some 3D rendering that they have here. If you use the interface, that the whole airplane moves around, which is client side, of course, but stuff like that is not created by MASA, but it's supported in MASA that you do that kind of stuff and have that on your front end available. So that's the RAF. I have my brother's website. He's a composer, performer, and a sound engineer here in Belgium. His website is running on MASA as well, which is a bit of a very portfolio-like website. But one of the things we built in there as well, that we have a complete little web shop that we built on top of MASA. And what's cool to mention here is that the whole web shop itself is actually an Ember.js based project. And we're using the different APIs that are available in MASA to basically pull in the content and get the categories, as well as get all the information, the different products that are available. There's filtering on categories. There are tons of different options to do filtering and look for whatever you need from his music shop. So that's really cool. An example on how you could within the rendering of MASA itself, have a single page application embedded in your website for that real rich interactivity you wanna deliver to your visitors. And the third one is I mentioned before that I'm a soccer coach here in our local town. We rebuild our website, and what's cool about this one is that we implemented a really cool theme that we found online, and really we were able to really quickly have that theme applied to our MASA instance. with a lot of custom modules. And maybe what we see here is a screenshot of a rather traditional page. But let me maybe quickly go to the website so that I can show you a little bit what we did with modules there. I have to make sure that I'm logged in first. Apparently, this time of the day, my watch is locked. There we go. Oh, wait, give me a sec. I'm going to do this slightly different then. Okay, so this is going to take a little bit too long, so I'll just skip it. But what I basically wanted to show you when we go to the homepage is that we have what you see here in the middle is one module that we drag and drop added to the page when we use the inline editing, and this is a second module that we add to the page. And then we have a banner here with a call to action, which is all these are custom modules that we built and that we basically took out of that theme that we found online and that we purchased, and then basically we cut that into modules and basically started building all these little tiny bit of modules to be able to use them anywhere we want on the page on the website. So even if we go to a more traditional page here on the on the website, which is some traditional content, we could really easily add a call to action, for example, to this page if we want to, and so on. Okay. So what about the future? The future of MASA? Well, we're constantly developing and improving MASA as we go. And one of the things that we started doing is that we've adopted what we call semantic versioning in our industry, which basically means that the versioning the numbering that we use for the versionings, we're using major, minor, and patch releases as the numbering. So when we're talking about 7.4, which is the current minor release which is available, so 7 is major, 7.4 that's minor, and we're at 7.4.4, which is the patch release that we released the end of last month with a few bug fixes that we added. So what we're trying to do is whenever we have something that we want to fix or something really small that we want to add to a version, we do that in a patch release. 7.4.4 contained some bug fixes submitted by the community, as well as some that we fixed ourselves for our clients. 7.4.5 will include a few that have been raised by the community that we're trying to fix. And we want to get a steady rhythm, and we've managed to do that for the last 2-3 months, a steady rhythm in which we try to come out with a monthly release, which is at least a patch release, and over time we'll try to add some minor releases and maybe even a major release to MASA as well. And sometimes these are small. If we're talking about patch releases, most of the time those are bug fixes. Sometimes we add a little bit of small functionality as well. One of the things we did in 7.4.3 is that we added support for Azure AD when using single sign-on in MASA. That's something that we added. There was already support for For Google, GitHub, and Facebook, some odd choices, I would say, for enterprise. But one of the things we've added is a support for Azure AD, and we want to look into adding more of those things. And if we do that, if it's just expanding the existing functionality a little bit, then we're doing that in a patch release. And when we're really adding new functionality, that'll be in a minor release. And so when are we talking about a major release then? A potential version 8 in the future. We'll release something as a major release the moment that we will actually have a big overhaul, or when we have breaking functionality. If we might break backwards compatibility, that will definitely be only in a major release, so that everybody's aware of it, and we can inform upfront about what's coming. Interesting to mention here as well is that we with I think 7.3, we introduced a few deprecations for MASA. Up till now, the only thing we did is that we listed and we tagged some of the functionality as deprecated. And what deprecated means is that sometime in the future we might remove that from the application, and we advise against using that. Maybe I should, and I'm going a little ahead of schedule here, but I'll quickly grab the MASA documentation so that I can show you. We have deprecations here. We have a list of deprecations, and one of the things is that we don't really deprecate the Mura tags, but what we did is, so you could still do Mura with brackets like this, and even Sava from back in days is still supported. And what we said, okay, we deprecate that, and for any future development you do, please just use M in between brackets, because that's what we're going to do moving forward. The same counts for the Mura scope, where nowadays you could do $ dot or Mura dot, and we're simplifying that and going to a simple option in the future, which is M dot. So for any new development you do, or any refactoring, or any time you come across something in your code, just update it to M dot instead of Mura dot, so that you're already made that change for potential future changes in MASA. And there are some more options here. Simple forms, for example, is deprecated. There is a very rich form builder for a while already in MASA and in Mura. You can it's switched, so the simple forms are switched off by default now, but if you want to, you can still enable that to make it available, but we advise against using that, and we ask to make use of the form builder instead. And one of the other things is that there is still some Razuna support in MASA, Razuna being a digital asset management system. But that as well, over time, support is still there, but over time we're gonna remove that as well. We haven't decided when yet. We're just warning that there will be a time in the future that we will we'll take that out. What is interesting as well is there is a list of things that were already deprecated in Mura that we've listed here as well. There's a list here, and even a cool thing that we added to make it easy for you, and we added that in 7.3, is that we create a log file with all instances, with all cases when you use anything which is deprecated. And that way we log that to the log file, so that you could inspect that log file and see, okay, oh wait, I'm still using the Mura scope somewhere, while I should be using the MASA scope, for example. And we log all of that, which makes it easy for you to update and be in line with the direction we're taking. These deprecation warnings, they can be configured with two settings that are available. You can enable them, disable them, especially for production environments. There we advise to disable it, of course, and you can also change the name of the log file if you want to. Those are a few settings, a few options that are available around deprecations. So that's the future ahead. The future ahead will very much be created by the community as well, and therefore I'm looking at you as maybe users nowadays of Mura or MASA, or somebody is looking into MASA. Let us know what's missing, or let us know what you think could be different. And then we'll keep an eye on that, and we'll try to see whether we could take that on and make those changes. All depending on our resource availability, of course. If you suddenly need a complete overhaul of the system, we need to plan ahead a little bit of that as well. But feel free to make suggestions so that we can shape the future together. That's something that we would really like to do, so that we can really bring it to your needs and to the level what you need from MASA. Sorry.
So I guess you're probably going to be jumping into it here in a second, but one of the things that dealing with MASA in the last year and a half, something like that, since it became MASA, is the documentation.
Yeah.
I know we used to have to rely on the Mura and the Blue River site for a lot of the documentation, and since they've removed almost all of it, it's the stuff that's on the actual docs.masa CMS site is lacking a lot. And I'm kind of struggling with that piece, is like, things like the list of the functions, a lot of that type of stuff, and all that, because even a lot of the sample like themes and all that stuff that used to be available from Blue River are all gone too.
Yeah.
So it's tough to kind of go through and figure out what some of these functions are, particularly if you're doing you're trying to migrate themes over and all that stuff.
True. That's a challenge. That's a challenge, and I already showed a little bit of the documentation, and I'll get right back to that, because resources and documentation is a big part of that. Is basically, so where do you find information, and where do you find those resources you're looking for to be able to find your answers for those questions you have and the information you're looking for. So one of the places, one of the resources that we have is the MASA CMS website, which I must admit is very oriented, let's say marketing oriented. It's not that you have a bunch of developer information on here, but where we do collect that information is in the documentation, and this is the documentation is what I showed you before. When we were looking at the deprecations, for example, the documentation is work in progress. Unfortunately, fortunately, the code of Mura was open source. Unfortunately, the documentation wasn't, which basically means that for MASA, we had to start from a blank sheet, rebuilding the documentation. We've been working hard on that over the last 2 years. We still have a disclaimer at the top when you go to the page, where we say, okay, there's still some stuff missing, and if you can't find what you need, we still reference the documentation of Mura 7.1, which, as far as I'm aware, is still online. So here you can find anything where you suddenly see a blank page in the MASA documentation. Basically means that we haven't written that yet, but you could probably find some of that documentation on the Mura side. You can find that from Mura 7.1. I tend to also look at the documentation from Mura 10 sometimes. because some of the stuff which is shipped in a open source version of Mura as well as in MASA is not always documented in the documentation for Mura 7.1, but is, for example, documented in Mura 10. So I do look at that a lot as well. But at the same time, I must say that there are areas where we're little by little we're getting ahead even of what's available in Mura, for example. I think one of the areas where I feel comfortable of saying that is that in the configuration side of things, and this is one of the things we worked on this summer, is that you have the settings of ini.cfm file. What we started doing is that we created a huge reference of all the available settings for this setting.ini file. Going from, okay, so admin domain, admin dir, admin email, and we each time we describe, okay, well, what's the default? What type is it? Is it a string? Is it a Boolean? Is it a list? And we also started adding descriptions for what this is. The admin domain setting is for if you want to use a separate URL to run the administrator and to not run the administrator as part of your main domain, but for example, run the administrator on a subdomain or a completely different domain. Looking for something else, the option to allow auto updates is another one. If that's set to false, for example, then the whole auto updater just doesn't work. You can basically do that if you want to deploy your updates in a different manner than using the auto updater. So all these settings, whenever they are new in a specific version of MASA, we've added them as well. I talked about Azure AD before. These are some settings on Azure AD. The thing is that when we started looking into the abilities with SSO in MASA, we discovered that there was some of it already implemented, but it was never documented. So the Mura documentation never mentioned what the settings are to implement single sign-on for the administrator as well as the front end of the website. So we started adding those, and we're even going through an exercise right now where we're scanning the complete code base of MASA to even look for settings that are not in the settings INI template, or that are not even mentioned in the config bean, because MASA basically it's very dynamic in the code base of MASA in that sense that you could add your own settings easily and then use them somewhere in your code. But that also means that not all the settings that are available are documented in the code or in the documentation. So that's where we're really trying to get an understanding of all those settings for the configuration file, and we're trying to really document that as well. That's one of the areas where we're looking for information ourselves to start to understand it better, what's going on, and so that's really useful. So yeah, that's one of the areas where we started adding more, especially when we make changes, looking at the modules, for example, that are available. All these modules that we reviewed, or that we added complete new modules, like the gated assets, for example, or like the media. For these, we do have a little bit of documentation. We try to immediately make sure that we update the documentation so that we don't lag behind on anything we added new to MASA. So that's the documentation. And another resource, so whenever you come across something and you're looking for some information, or you don't find the information you need and you have a question, for example, or you run into a bug, go to GitHub. We have the GitHub account with the MASA CMS project. where we have issues where you can log an issue. If you have a bug or if you have a feature request, you can add those there so that we can keep track. And there is also a discussion forum where you could basically post a question, and I'm very happy that a few people from the community actively follow up and give answers to each other as well, and that it's not always coming from us, but from the community in a whole to help each other out there. That's also where we post. A discussion forum is also the prime resource where we post updates whenever we have releases coming out. Yeah, so keep an eye on that. If you want to make that even easier, and I realize that I think I forgot to add that to the slide deck. But if you go to the MASA website, there is an option to subscribe to the newsletter. If you put your email address in here, then you can subscribe yourself to the newsletter, and that way we will send you an email as well whenever there's a security patch coming out, when there is an issue, or whenever we release a new version or have something else that we want to announce. So that's a really good resource. We try to limit the amount of emails that we send. So we're not going to spam you like crazy. That's not our goal. I think over the last year in total, the amount of emails that we've sent out is under 10. So we really try to be not overload you with information, but use it as a good communication tool when necessary. And like I mentioned before, don't forget about the Mura documentation, which is good and which is still there. So which can also be a good resource to figure out what information you're looking for. Does that help a little bit on the documentation side of things? Rick, was it you earlier that
that was Nick?
Yeah. So yeah, I guess it does help a little bit. I guess I've been running into issues where the Mura documentation on their site is starting to, like, some of the links that they're providing, like they provided links to like GitHub repositories and things like that. Some of those are starting to go away, and it's getting a little bit harder to find some of the things.
I see. Hit me up with any of those that you're missing, because maybe we still have, as long as it's open, it was open source. Those repositories, we might still have a copy of those lying around, so feel free to hit us up. Talking about, what I forgot to mention about documentation, I quickly want to add that as well is. And I stole this idea from the Lucy guys that have a similar functionality in their documentation. Whenever you come across a page somewhere in the documentation, for example, introduction on plugins, and you see it's empty, and you know a little bit about this, and you want to contribute and help us out. This can be as simple as clicking the edit this page on GitHub link, which is on the bottom of any page in the documentation. And if you click on that, you immediately go to GitHub, where you can add with Markdown, add the documentation you want to add, and you can commit the changes in a pull request to the documentation right away. It's possible to download, to clone the documentation to your local system and to run it on your local system, and all of that. And the way to do that is all described in the README, which is straightforward. But you could, even if you, for example, see a typo, because I'm not a native English speaker, if you see a typo, you could easily in the documentation say edit, fix the typo, submit it, and we get a notification, and we'll immediately especially if it's typos, get those fixed and accept those pull requests, of course. Yeah, and when you look at this, you'll probably notice something, and they always say eat your own dog food. I must admit that for the MASA documentation, we're not using MASA for the MASA documentation. We're using Jerkle, which is I think Rails or something. I don't know. But the important thing here is that we wanted to make it really easy to contribute and to contribute to the documentation. And that's why we went with something like this, so that we could, like I showed, that you could easily submit something to the documentation. And that we're always looking into using MASA anywhere we can, and potentially we might do it in the future for the documentation as well. But for the time being, this was an easier workflow to get this out and to allow people to help us out with documentation than to set up a MASA instance and start writing a lot of custom code to support contributions and stuff like that. So that's for all the folks who always complain about Adobe not using Cold Fusion for their adobe.com website. One of the last things, one of the last slides I've got for you is I want to explain a little. Sorry? Sorry?
No, I think Rick just hit his microphone there.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
No
worries.
So, Nick, would it be possible you could send him a top 5 or 10 list of what you're looking for, and they'd have it, and when they got some free time, maybe they'd start filling it out for you?
About documentation?
Yeah.
October is coming up, right? And which means that Hacktoberfest is coming up, and it's somewhere on my to-do list to create a few tickets, especially around documentation, some areas where we could use some help, and to list them and to make a list like that available before Hacktoberfest starts, so that contributing to the documentation actually counts for Hacktoberfest as well. I don't know if everybody's familiar with that. Hacktoberfest is this yearly event that I think GitHub, together with DigitalOcean, did over the last few years, where they try to get people to contribute to open source software. And that can be by in the form of documentation as well as code fixes or functionality. Can be a lot of that. We'll communicate a little bit more about that once we get closer to October, and we'll prepare a little bit of that. So that'll definitely come up. It's somewhere on the to-do list for me to look at. But one of the last few slides that I quickly want to go over is that we are North, that we offer support for MASA as well, enterprise support, and we have a few cloud options available. To give you an idea, so we are North as a company. We're located in Europe, in the Netherlands, and we always say that what we do is customization as a service. One of the reasons why we like MASA so much is that whenever we come across a project for a client of ours, we avoid to start from an empty folder without any code, but we always try to use existing components and to tie them into each other so that we create a rich solution for our clients. It wouldn't surprise you probably that a lot of us are big Lego fans, where you use a lot of bricks to build something custom as well. So that's not a big surprise, I would say. So and to help out our clients or anyone who's looking for help with MASA, we have a few support options available. We try to keep them as simple as possible, which basically means that every support package comes with a set number of hours, and those hours can be used for development, as well as consulting, as well as training, as well as support ticket, anything you need. If you have a set number of hours in your support contract, it could very well be that today you use it. You ask us to use a few of those hours to fix a bug that cannot wait for you. For which you cannot wait, and it's really trivial for your organization. And then next week or next month, it could be a couple of hours for us to look over your shoulder and help out with something if you're stuck, or to develop something custom for you, add some new functionality to MASA. It can be anything of that, and even training. If you're looking for some training options, we do have a few training options that they're not publicly listed for the time being, but we have some training options, and if you're looking for that, that's perfectly possible as well. What you see is that we don't only have MASA support, but we also have MASA Cloud, which basically, if you go for a premium or an advanced option, within those options, we include a cloud environment with premium and 2 cloud environments with the advanced, where we could basically take care of hosting your website. And for the time being, we support AWS for that, but we're also looking to add support for Azure and Google Cloud Platform in the near future for those, so that we could do it on any cloud provider you're looking for. So that's my introduction to MASA CMS. I think I went a little bit over an hour. Hopefully no one fell asleep by now. But I'm looking forward to maybe answer some questions. Maybe some of you have some questions or something you want to share about MASA that I can help with, or can give you my point of view on.
Do you have any questions, Randy?
I remember looking at Mura like back in the day, and now it's like MASA. It's still database driven, or I think before they closed, I think they set it up where it would basically publish straight HTML pages. Is that still true, or am I recalling this incorrectly?
It's database driven, yeah. Supporting MySQL, MariaDB, Oracle, MS SQL, and Postgres. I think what you're referring to with HTML is what we call decoupled. And decoupled is one of the big features in Mura 10, from what I've understood. And it's one of the things we're looking into with MASA to see how we can support that, so that you could really basically have a static output of your website available, and that you don't need. Yeah, that's what decoupled does, and we're looking into that, but we don't support that right now. I can't remember which percentage we put on it, but it might be that we're like somewhere between 80 and 90% there. But as we know in IT projects, the first 80% go in 20% of the time, and the last 20% takes 80% of the time. So no promises on that yet.
Thank you. I like that. That is so true.
Guust, I got a couple questions for you. First of all, you didn't mention it, and I guess it's almost kind of so common in Europe that you don't even think to mention anymore, but it's still an issue over here in America, is GDPR. I know guys that with small businesses that have literally fenced off their website to North America because they don't want to deal with it. Is it something that you support just out of the box?
That I'm laughing because that's it's a difficult question in that sense. What are the requirements to be GDPR compliant? That's I think MASA is GDPR compliant. Because basically out of the box there's nothing that's going on which is intrusive on privacy. Of course, one of the good examples is cookies. We have cookies with MASA, but all the cookies in MASA are functional. I think that the tricky part comes when building a website. What do you do with analytics, for example? It is. Let me phrase it differently. It's perfectly possible to create a GDPR compliant website with MASA. The questions, the things you can and cannot do around it is more in the surroundings of what you're doing in your project. Where are you hosting it? What type of external services are you using? Where's that data going? Those are the tricky questions that need to be answered. Yeah, when building a website. And I understand what you mean. I've seen it before. Sites that are completely blocked for Europe, American sites, or I think the what's it called, the Indianapolis Star, the newspaper in Indiana. I think they serve a different version of their content for Europe, for example. So I've seen cases of that. Yeah, does that answer your question a little bit?
I think what would, and I admit I'm not real knowledgeable about it, but I haven't needed to know. But I think if you said it was compliant and maybe had a one pager on the website and say, if you do these common things, you're going to be uncompliant. And if you don't need all these common things and you just build a website with this, you're good. And that is going to reassure a lot of small clients.
That's I'm writing that down.
The big companies have already handled it. I'm sure Michigan State has thought about it and they've already got it handled. But for a small company, that's something I talk to people that aren't IT people and they'll ask me about. And it's a selling point, is I guess the easiest way of saying it.
Yeah. No, I see what you mean. It's a good idea for us to write a bit of explanation on that and what to look out for. Yeah.
I think it'll help your SEO too, because I think there's a lot of people doing searches on that. I could be wrong, but I think there are.
True.
I talked with a guy that I was trying to get to the meeting tonight, and he had to go to a school function with his wife. And he's a big CFer, but he's never used Mura or MASA.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, well, what I didn't like about it, it turned me off. And he's a big JavaScript guy too. And this may no longer be true, but I don't know. He said they're running an outdated version of Node. And he said, I think under the covers they use jQuery, which to him is like, we've got plenty of members in our group still use jQuery. But I'm just saying, to him it was. And you talked about updating the operating system, the UI. What is current MASA using?
This is one of the things I was looking at together with my colleague last week. MASA still depends on jQuery, and that'll be for the time being. And we where we can, we're trying to get rid of it. Don't get me wrong, jQuery did a hell of a job for us as web developers back in the days. But you're right. Nowadays, you kind of want to do it without. In the MASA Bootstrap 5 theme, for example, out of the box comes without jQuery. So that's already a good evolution. But one of the things we noticed last week is that the A11, what's it called again? The accessibility extension that's available in CK Editor, that's enabled for MASA. That extension still requires jQuery. So we're actually looking into fixing that on whenever you're in inline edit, that we do load jQuery for that. On the other hand, I must admit that we're on jQuery. We're on CK Editor version 4, and there is a big update to CK Editor 5 necessary. So once we start, we're looking into that, and when we tackle that, it could very well be that it comes with a new version of that accessibility extension, and that we no longer have the need for jQuery there. If we can, we're trying to get rid of it. But
do you know what you'd move to, or don't you know?
Instead of jQuery,
yeah.
There are areas in the administrator nowadays where Vue has been used already.
Okay, this guy's a big Vue guy, so that's a good answer.
Yeah. So the file browser is using Vue, as well as the custom content, the objects, the scaffolder that I briefly touched somewhere earlier. That's using Vue as well. So we're looking into using that right now with the current version of the administrator, for example. And Vue is an easy one for that, because it's really easy to embed that into an existing application and start refactoring bits and pieces of the administrator without the need to completely redo everything at once, which is more of a logic scenario when switching to React or Angular, for example. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll prod him and see if I can get him to volunteer with you. I don't know if he will, but he does a lot of websites for the locals. And, if it's a case that's under process and, maybe he could speed it along, maybe I get him to help you. So
yeah,
I was asking this on behalf of him because he would have asked that if he'd shown up. Now on the modules, have you ever considered doing like a store? So that, small independent side hustle people could have a module, and by placing it on your website, like most developers were weak at marketing. As a solo entrepreneur, I certainly am. And if you had a module and you coded it and you put it up there and suddenly the money just came in, that might be attractive to people. At least you get more of a community around you.
You're talking about like Slatwall that already exists?
Right. Yeah, I don't know if they were marketing through Mura at the time, but yeah, that's one example. I don't know if they're still in business, are they, Nick?
They still do have MASA and Mura plugins, but they've kind of gone a different direction at this point too.
Okay.
I think that, there could definitely be. I would like that, to have a store like that. Even if it's just a listing of what's available, because we have, if you and I can quickly show that. If you go to GitHub and you go to not to the code of MASA CMS itself, but if you go one level higher to what they call the team, I think. Anyway, or the organization, We have a couple more repositories here. We have, for example, we have a MASA Google Sitemap plugin. There's an authenticator plugin, which allows for implementation of MFA, multi-factor authentication with MASA. The MASA translations. So these are plugins that we forked, as well as MASA that we forked from what was available from Mura. So there is a little bit of that here already, but indeed, if we could make that more visual and really create to start off with a listing, and potentially also an option for people to list theirs, that would be really cool. Mura had it a long time ago, and I remember I submitted some of the things I developed before on there as well. So yeah, it would
Another
be cool.
possibility is like templates. I mean, I'm going to probably be using MASA for my startup, and I will probably buy a template because I'm no web designer, but I'm going to have to adapt it. And that's going to be a lot of labor doing stuff I don't like. And if there was a selection and I found one I liked that already worked out of the box on MASA, that'd be real convenient to me anyway.
We're looking into stuff like that,
Okay.
and see if we can get that done. Yeah. But I can't say more about that right now.
Well,
but it's an area that we're aware of the needs, and it creates visibility for the CMS if there are options like that available. That's
absolutely
true. That's true. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's only the questions I got. Randy, Nick, you got any more questions for him?
So I guess the only other comment the thing I have is for a lot of the sites that I deploy, I tend to do them in containers. And one of the way I kind of do that is through empirical setups. So essentially, Mura runs, it's pointing to a common database. I want to have all the files, images, all that stuff on like an S3 bucket or something like that. And the way it currently, it's not easy, I'll say, to get that to work just right. Particularly like to have Mura actually like store everything out to to S3 or to anywhere else, any other blob system. I know there's some configurations that exist in the INI files, but it seems like it's always out of parity with the way that Lucy uses the virtual file system and things like that. Is there any thought on improving that process? Again, particularly for people who do like containerized deployments and things like that.
We're a big fan of containerized environments. I can't say we only run containerized environments, because we took over some servers that we haven't migrated yet. But anything new we do containerized. And so our website is running on MASA. It's containerized. The MASA website as well is a container running with a RDS database on AWS using S3 for files. You're totally right. It is supported for sure in MASA, but it's not always documented the way we would want to, and that's one of the areas where we're trying to improve as well. Indeed, if about S3, for example, or the docs, the configuration file, file. If you look for file, the file directory, there are some options here. I have to look it up. If I don't know them out of the top of my head, but there is an option. You can configure S3 through the configuration of MASA. So that's definitely an option. But I don't know the exact configuration out of the top of my head. Need to look it up. One of the other things which is really cool, and that's something that unfortunately I haven't been able to document yet. It's actually the ticket to do that has been assigned to me for a few weeks already. But any of those, but I can share that right now. Any of those settings that you can add to the config file, to the settings INI file, you can also configure that through environment variables for with Docker. Not only with Docker environment variables, Java environment variables in general. So what we do a lot is that if we have, do I have a good example? Not out of the top of my head, but yeah, basically anything we configure with MASA, we do through the environment variables. And those environment variables we pass on to our Docker container, and that way we configure the containers. So, but that's one of the areas that I definitely want to document a little bit more about. What we don't do is, I know that Mura in the past had a Docker image available on Docker Hub. We haven't done that, and we're basically I'm kind of looking for the use case, in a sense that if you just take a Lucy or an ACF image and you throw the code in there and you configure using the environment variables, it just runs. So I don't see the immediate. It could very well be that for exposure it would be a good thing, but I don't see the immediate technical need for a specific MASA Docker image. Also because if once we start doing that, we need to maintain it, and we need to make sure that before we start doing that, we have necessary pipelines and CI/CD in place so that we can really automate that process as well, and avoid that it's another half an hour or another hour or 2 hours extra work anytime we do a release.
Yeah. And I'd kind of agree with that too, because what ends up happening is, you have your image out there, and that's for a fresh MASA install.
Yeah.
Which, you're going to want to, point it to your database and all this other stuff, which, starts getting into the way of all that. And the way that MASA works is first time it runs, it also explodes a bunch of files and does all the database work and all that stuff, which just makes it really slow on that warm up. So.
Yeah, that's something I think you can kind of I think you can avoid that. That basically depends on what code do you put and do not put in the Docker image that you're building for deployment. Right. Depends a little bit of that. You could kind of like pre-warm your MASA image like that, and especially if you want to do that kind of stuff, then you definitely need you definitely kind of want to build the image yourself. I think.
Right. I'd agree. It's one of the things that it's good in theory, but I've found, because even with the old Mura Docker images, it was always like, it's a clean image and you still have to configure it, and it's not just stand up 10 of them and have them load balance and that type of stuff. So
what is available right now in MASA, and that's maybe interesting to show as well. So if you go to the core and then to Docker, there are a bunch of configurations available, Docker Compose configurations for MASA. So you could easily, if you want to, you could just clone or like download MASA, unzip it on your local drive, go to that path, hit Docker Compose up, and it just, assuming you have Docker installed, and it just starts MASA, and you can start using MASA and play with it and develop it. And there's a lot you can learn from these settings that are available in those Docker Compose files if you start looking at them. But just like I mentioned before, all these MASA settings are available through environment variables. Some of them are listed here. And you can configure your database connection, for example. It's one of the things. I'm working on an updated version of those Docker Compose configurations, which is a little bit work in progress. And those will contain even more options. I'm basically trying to get Lucy as well as ACF, as well as the database versions, different options you could use. And also, and the main reason why we're building that is also for ourselves, so that we can run the test suite that exists against those different environments and see if we see problems coming up in one of those configurations.
Yeah.
And
in my case, I would love a lot of those settings at INI files, as many of those to be moved to the database as possible to make it so that they're consistent across multiple deployments and things like that. But, minus have the bootstrap and stuff in there so it knows how to connect to the database. But, that would be nice.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you want to move them to the database. Once you move them to the database, I think it becomes a lot harder. In my opinion, it becomes a lot harder to manage them, because then you basically need to go into the database to change them. And what we do now is that based on the environment we're spinning up. We do a lot of it. To give you an idea, when we spin up an environment on AWS, for example, we completely code our environments with CDK, for example, or CloudFormation, and that basically means that we spin up an RDS instance and get all the information on how to connect to the RDS instance. We get that whenever we start up an environment, and then we can immediately pass that information on to MASA through the environment variables. But if we need to, first of all, with the database connection, it'll be difficult to store that in the database if you don't know how to connect to the database.
No, and like I said,
it definitely wouldn't work for
of
that one. But for a lot of things, it'll be difficult if you need to update that in the database as part of your deployment process. We rather keep that keep that through environment variables. Yeah, and then talking AWS specific, we save that kind of information in the parameter store or in the secret manager. So now we in some cases we use the secret manager, which is a little bit more expensive, but automatically we get audit trail, and we see whenever somebody's looking at those values and stuff like that. So yeah, we have the value, the advantages that come with that. Yeah.
Guust, have you considered moving your XML configuration to JSON, which I think is what Lucy's doing, and I believe it's maybe starting with Adobe? It sure is easier.
Yes and no. I remember from they announced this at CFCamp for Lucy that they are gonna move to JSON for their instead of XML for their configuration files. I immediately told them that I'm not a big fan of that. But there is a solution coming. The reason why I'm not a big fan of JSON for configuration, and I would prefer YAML, for example, over JSON right now, is that JSON doesn't allow for comments. And in a more recent version of JSON that will be supported, or that is supported, I need to read up on that a little bit. But I want to be able to put, if I cannot put comments around configuration, then yeah, no, that's far from ideal. So that's but once that problem is solved, yeah, then I become a big fan of JSON. I'm a fan of JSON already, don't get me wrong, but then it becomes an option, in my opinion, to do that, because there's nothing worse than a configuration file that has no comments in there with explanation, stuff like that. Yeah.
Are we going to get timed out here, Nick? I see a notice that we have less than 5 minutes left.
No, it's whenever I shut it down, so we're good.
Okay. I wanted to reach out to Carrie if you had any questions before we end the meeting. Thank you for coming, and you can just activate your mic and let us know yes or no.
Actually, I don't know if they can, so they'll have to chat.
Okay. We can pass along what you say in chat. So I've learned by calling out people sometimes they do have questions and they just you get them that way. Or Carrie may have stepped away.
Well, while we're waiting, is anyone here in the room going to Vegas for CF Summit next month?
I like to, but can't do it. Nope.
I'll be around. So if anyone wants to hit me up with any questions there, that's an option as well, of course. I would look for me in the morning because then I'll be the most awake due to the huge jet lag. I remember from last year that by the time I was I got rid of the jet lag was when I was going back to Europe. So
Randy learned about jet
great.
lag this year, didn't you?
Sorry?
Randy. He learned about jet lag.
Oh yeah, sure did.
Well, it looks like Carrie doesn't have anything to say, so I want to thank you very much, Guust. Unless anybody else has got any questions, I'll get you a link as soon as this pops up on our YouTube channel. And I
Cool.
certainly learned a lot tonight, and I'm very bullish on your product.
Thank you. Yeah, I haven't mentioned it, I think, somewhere, but if anyone wants to hit me up, you can always look me up on LinkedIn. That's a safe, a good place to get in contact. But otherwise, I'll quickly add it here to the screen. You can always reach me on guust@wearenorth.eu. That's my email address. Send me an email, and I'll be more than happy to help out with where I can.
That's terrific.
Great. Well, thank you again.
Thanks for having me.